When a famous French wine family buys an Oregon winery, the headline usually focuses on money. A historic name, a beautiful estate, new tanks, more acreage. But money does not grow grapes. Farmers do. And in the vineyards of Oregon, something more interesting than an acquisition is happening. Burgundy arrived with centuries of experience. Now, Burgundy is asking Oregon questions. This story was inspired by a fascinating July 2026 Decanter article about the deepening relationship between Burgundy and the Willamette Valley. The acquisitions are the news peg. The farming will determine whether any of them matter. Before sunrise in Oregon, a picking crew moves through wet rows under headlamps. Somebody tastes a berry, cuts it open, and looks at the seeds. Months earlier, another worker decided where to cut the vine in winter. In Burgundy, a grower makes the same kind of decision while studying the permanent wood of an old plant. The vineyard does not know who owns the company. It responds to water, temperature, disease, soil biology, canopy exposure, and the hands working among the rows. That is the soul of this story. Not Burgundy teaching Oregon how to imitate France, but two groups of farmers comparing field notes. Oregon's modern wine story began as a wager. In the 1960s, David Lett planted Pinot Noir in the Willamette Valley when serious Pinot from Oregon was still largely an idea. Burgundy was an inspiration, but inspiration did not provide a local rule book. Growers had to learn which slopes ripened fruit, which clones performed, how much crop a young vine could carry, and whether harvest could finish before autumn rain. Western Oregon was cool enough for Pinot Noir, but the region succeeded because growers learned how Oregon behaved. Vintage by vintage. A wine region is not discovered when someone plants a vine. It is discovered through thousands of small farming decisions. Oregon's real founding document was a farmer's notebook. The French relationship did not arrive all at once. The Drouhin family established Domaine Drouhin, Oregon in 1987, long before the current acquisition cycle. That mattered because the estate demonstrated that a Burgundy family could farm in Oregon without trying to make Oregon disappear. The useful question was never, can Oregon make Burgundy? It was, what happens when a Burgundy family farms Oregon long enough to hear Oregon's own voice? That long experiment was followed by another major step in 2013 when Maison Louis Jadot created Résonance, its first winery project outside Burgundy. Then the pace accelerated. Beaux Frères was acquired by Henriette in 2017, and Henriette later became part of Artémis Domaines. Champagne-Bollinger acquired Ponzi Vineyards in 2021. These owners brought capital, equipment, international networks, and access to people with generations of experience in elite French vineyards. At Ponzi, investment reportedly supported new tanks, vineyard expansion, a sophisticated sorting line, and work with pruning specialists Simonet and Search. But capital can purchase equipment. It cannot instantly purchase knowledge of Oregon's frost pockets, winds, rains, wildfire risk, labor constraints, or the personality of a block across 20 vintages. The French brought resources. Oregon supplied Oregon. To understand why that matters, forget the tasting room for a moment and follow the farmer's year. Winter begins with pruning. A worker chooses the vine's architecture, its likely crop, the position of future shoots, and part of its long-term health. Simonet and Search teach pruning that respects sap flow and limits large, damaging cuts. That may sound abstract until somebody changes where a crew makes a cut on thousands of vines. Each cut is small. The cumulative effect can last for decades. A healthy old vineyard is not created by calling it old vine later. It is created by avoiding repeated damage now. Spring brings bud break, frost risk, uneven growth, mildew pressure, and shoot thinning. Oregon's wet springs can encourage disease, while its increasingly dry summers can introduce water stress. Then comes flowering and fruit set, when a few difficult days can alter the size of the crop. In summer, crews position shoots, remove leaves, manage cover crops, hedge canopies, thin clusters, monitor pests, and decide whether a block needs water. Every intervention is a trade-off. More sunlight can reduce disease and green flavors. Too much exposure can sunburn fruit during a heat event. Less crop can accelerate ripening. Too little crop can change vine balance and destroy the economics of the farm. Harvest is not a sugar alarm that rings when the grapes are done. A grower considers acidity, pH, seed maturity, skin texture, flavor, weather, labor, winery capacity, smoke exposure, and the style of wine being pursued. One more week may bring complexity. It may also bring rain, heat, birds, or a picking crew that is no longer available. Wine descriptions love to begin in the cellar. Oak, extraction, fermentation. But the wine's possibilities were narrowed months earlier. At pruning, during flowering, when leaves were removed, and when a grower decided that one more week of ripening was worth the risk, or wasn't. So what is France actually bringing? First, institutional memory. A Burgundy domain may hold records of cause and effect across generations. How old vines decline, how repeated pruning wounds accumulate, how soils behave under compaction, and how canopy decisions change disease pressure. Those conclusions are not automatically transferable to Oregon, but the memory is valuable. Second, a culture of vine longevity. The most important French import may be the idea that a vine planted today should still be healthy when today's vineyard worker is long retired. Third is site sensitivity, the insistence that neighboring parcels can produce meaningfully different wines. That encouraged Oregon growers to look past broad regional identity and examine elevation, aspect, wind, soil depth, drainage, rooting conditions, and differences inside a single vineyard. Fourth is patience. Family ownership can operate on a multi-generational timeline. A new planting needs years to establish and much longer to reveal its personality. The glamorous symbol of French investment may be a barrel or a sorting machine. The deeper contribution is an agricultural time horizon. But this is where the direction of travel changes. Decanter reports that Burgundy professionals are increasingly asking Oregon growers what is working. Oregon's wine culture developed without the same density of inherited appellation hierarchies, so growers often share information about clones, rootstocks, pests, pruning, smoke, vineyard trials, and harvest conditions. Oregon State University strengthens that network by turning applied research on nutrition, disease, smoke exposure, production costs, and vineyard practices into information growers can use. Burgundy has often accumulated knowledge inside families and domains. Oregon frequently builds it through a network of growers, researchers, extension specialists, and neighboring wineries. That network did not begin with a research grant. In the early Willamette Valley, there were too few growers, too little local experience, and not enough equipment for everyone to pretend they were self-sufficient. Julia Wayne of Abbey Ridge remembered vineyard families borrowing tractors and other machinery, while helping one another work out how grapes could be grown in the Dundee Hills. The equipment mattered, because a young farm might not own the machine it needed. The conversation around the machine mattered even more. One grower had tried a spacing. Another had watched a site hold frost. Somebody else had learned what failed in wet spring soil. A tractor crossed a property line, and knowledge crossed with it. The same cooperation appeared after harvest. Nancy Ponzi recalled that the early producers did not travel out to sell and pour wine one by one. A small group went together. Neighborhood dinners became informal post-harvest conferences. Oregon Wine Growers Association meetings took place at the Teagard Fire Hall, and sometimes in growers' homes. These people were competitors, but they were also building the category that would allow any of them to survive. Before Oregon Pinot Noir had a reputation, its producers had to lend one another credibility. That is why cooperation here should not be mistaken for friendliness around a tasting table. It was infrastructure. Shared machinery reduced the cost of being small. Shared harvest observations reduced the cost of being inexperienced. Group tastings made a tiny region visible. Associations helped growers organize around problems no vineyard could solve alone. The romance of the pioneer is usually a person standing alone on a hill. Oregon's more accurate founding image may be two muddy farmers trying to start the same borrowed tractor. University Extension Services made that informal network more durable. Extension is the bridge between a research result and a farming decision. A field trial translated into a scouting guide, a disease warning, a nutrient protocol, a vineyard budget, a workshop, or a specialist a grower can actually call. Oregon State University Extension now supports wine growers with vineyard management, pest and disease control, site selection, nutrition, canopy management, production economics, and sustainability from planting through the life of the vineyard. The Oregon Wine Research Institute strengthens the loop by bringing together university researchers and educators, USDA scientists, public agencies, and the wine industry. Growers help define the questions. Researchers test them. Extension specialists turn the results into usable tools. Growers try those tools in real vineyards and report what happened. That feedback creates the next question. This is how smoke exposure becomes more than panic, how magnesium or mildew becomes something measurable, and how a young region accumulates institutional memory without waiting several centuries. A younger region also has fewer sacred rules. Oregon growers can question planting density, row orientation, irrigation, cover crops, clones, harvest dates, vessels, and even how vineyard boundaries are drawn. Not every experiment works. That is the point. Live, the Pacific Northwest's Independent Sustainable Wine Growing Certification adds another shared system. Sustainability here is not a green logo floating above a bottle. It is a set of practical decisions about habitat, cover crops, insects, sprays, streams, soil, and measurement. Which pests can be tolerated? When is treatment justified? Can biodiversity coexist with a productive farm? Oregon's contribution is not moral superiority. It is a habit of testing, sharing, and revising. Oregon also excels at putting consumers physically near the farm. Oregon Pinot Camp and the region's direct hospitality culture let visitors stand among vines, meet growers, and understand wine as agriculture. That may sound like marketing, and of course it is. But it is also education. A consumer who has watched a pruning decision or stood beside a soil pit is less likely to think wine simply appears in a barrel. This open relationship among farms, researchers, neighbors, and drinkers is something Burgundy can study without becoming less Burgundian. For years, Oregon's international identity rested overwhelmingly on Pinot Noir. Chardonnay changes the conversation because it gives growers another instrument for understanding sight. Dominique Lafond's work at Evening Land, beginning in 2007, helped influence a move toward earlier picking and less extraction. Earlier does not mean underripe. It means trying to preserve acidity, citrus and orchard fruit character, moderate potential alcohol, and differences among sites before warmth pushes every block toward the same ripe flavors. And extraction is not only a red wine idea. For Chardonnay, it can mean pressing pressure, solids, skin contact, lees handling, bâtonnage, barrel influence, and oxygen management. The broader Oregon movement is away from manufacturing richness and toward preserving distinctions made in the vineyard. Pinot Noir proved Oregon could make serious wine. Chardonnay may prove something even more interesting, that Oregon's vineyards differ enough from one another to deserve a much more detailed map. That brings us to Atomique 3, a Chardonnay collaboration involving winemaker Felipe Ramirez, soil specialist Pedro Parra, and Meursault producer Jean-Marc Rouleau. The project, beginning with the 2021 vintage, studies Oregon Chardonnay through tiny geological zones. Most vineyard maps follow property lines, roads, and rectangular blocks because rectangles are convenient. Geology did not receive the memo. Lava, erosion, sediment, rooting depth, and water movement do not stop where the tractor turns. Parra uses soil pits and geological mapping to identify irregular zones he calls polygons. A polygon may cut across several rows, pass through part of a block, or circle a pocket of fractured basalt or sedimentary material. Somebody still has to mark it, prune it, monitor it, pick it separately, and keep the fruit separate in the winery. Excellent grapes outside the chosen zone may be sold rather than included. You could call it terroir as a service. The farmers would probably prefer that you pick up a shovel. This does not prove that every soil difference becomes a flavor a drinker can name. Soil is one influence among water availability, rooting depth, microbial life, vine age, clone, rootstock, canopy, yield, weather, harvest date, pressing, fermentation, and élevage. The compelling part of Atomique 3 is not a mystical claim that it has decoded terroir. It is the discipline of farming smaller, geologically coherent units over multiple vintages. Terroir is not a slogan. It is a hypothesis tested through repeated agricultural work. There is a tension here that no honest film should hide. Outside investment can preserve vineyards, improve equipment, fund better farming, create stable jobs, and validate Oregon on the world stage. It can also raise land values and pull prized fruit inside well-funded estates, making the best sites harder for small labels and young growers to access. Investment can save a vineyard. It can also put that vineyard beyond the reach of the next independent winemaker. Oregon wants the resources of the old wine world without inheriting all of its barriers. Both opportunity and risk are real. Climate pressure makes the exchange more urgent and less hierarchical. Burgundy and Oregon now face greater volatility. Heat, drought stress, spring frost, compressed ripening, wildfire smoke, shifting disease patterns, and harvests that refuse to follow old calendars. A pruning method from Friuli may help preserve vines in both places. A smoke trial in Oregon may help growers far beyond Oregon. A Chilean soil specialist may reshape how Chardonnay is farmed with advice from a winemaker in Meursault. This is not tradition disappearing. It is tradition becoming connected. The age of one region possessing all the answers is over. At the end of harvest, the headlines leave before the farmers do. Someone washes picking bins. Someone repairs a broken post. A worker removes a glove and rubs soil between their fingers. The French investment in Oregon will be measured in money, acreage, equipment, and bottles sold. Farmers will measure it in vines that live longer, soil that holds together, workers who understand why a cut is made, Chardonnay picked at the right moment, vineyards mapped more honestly, and whether the next generation can still afford to farm. Burgundy gave Oregon a model. Oregon gave Burgundy a partner. And somewhere between limestone and basalt, the farmers began writing the next chapter together. Great wine is not made in a region. It is farmed in a place,